Monanan jauh tolo uglas ai jati saco empty space in my heart. I cannot replace your love. Makes me come alive. Makes it all worthwhile. Makes me feel alive. In my life, there's an empty space in my heart. I cannot replace your love. Makes me come alive. Makes it all worthwhile.
Hello, can you hear me? With your permission, we're gonna stall 5 more minutes for people that are still in the parking lot. That's okay? My wife is Cuban, so it's rare that I do anything on time. So I'm grateful for your patience. We'll start in 5 minutes. Thanks.
choose life. Unashamedly, unabashedly, choosing your most sacred gift of life. Together we pray as the Savior taught us. Our Father, thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Our Lady of Good Remedy, pray for us. Our holy Trinitarian founders, pray for us. And today we celebrate the feast of Saint Matthew, the gospel writer and preacher of the gospel. Pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. And just one more commercial. After the doctor's presentation, the Third Order is sponsoring various religious items, and Doctor has his book on the table over here for your purchasing after tonight's presentation. So, heard enough of me. Welcome, Dr. Christie.
Can you all hear me? Thank you, Father, very much. It's great to be with you all. By the way, and as to the turnout, I usually speak to crowds of 5 or 6 people, so this is a massive turnout for me, and I'm thrilled. I traveled about an hour and 15 minutes to get here, but actually this is sort of the backyard where I grew up. I grew up on 104th Street and Ludlam. In fact, I took my first communion just down the street at St. Louis by accident. I wasn't Catholic at the time. I apologize, Father, but God got me back. I converted 20 years later. There was a cute girl that I loved, and I had this crush on her, and she invited me to church, and she went up and took communion. I thought that's what you did, so I just went up and took my communion. So, anyway, not part of my talk. When usually I start these talks, people make a big fuss about why I'm qualified to speak on the issue of abortion. They say as a physician that, well, I've studied embryology, and I've studied science, and as a lawyer, I've studied the law and the Constitution. As a father of 5, I at least know a little bit about babies and pregnancy. And as a married husband for over 25 years, I've come to appreciate the challenges women face balancing a career, my wife's a physician, and family life, raising 5 children. And all those really are important and help me, but none of them are my most important credential. I think the reason I'm most qualified to speak on the issue of abortion is because I spent the first 35 years of my life as a secular, pro-choice liberal. So I know exactly what, why, and how the other side thinks about abortion. And having lived in first the pro-choice and now the pro-life worlds, I have a fairly unique vantage point from which to address these issues. I like to say that when I was pro-choice, I learned the arguments. But when I became pro-life, I learned the truth. And not like today's society, my truth and your truth. No, the truth. And this presentation and the book that accompanies it, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, are the truth. And again, I'm grateful to be invited to be with you all today. I want to say a little bit. The book I have out here is for sale. When I first wrote this book and started putting it out on tables like this, I was a little embarrassed to push the book. I'm selling a book. I look like I'm a salesperson. I don't feel embarrassed at all. The cause is incredibly important, and I don't accept a single penny from any sales of the book. So I give it all back to the pro-life cause. The publisher takes their cut, but I don't take a single penny. So buy the book. And whether you buy it from me or you buy it from Amazon, you can go to Amazon, it's appropriate, and you can leave a review. And I like to say that and this is important, it helps the algorithms. If you buy the book and you like it a lot, please go to Amazon and give it 5 stars. If you buy the book and you're not really wild about it, please go to Amazon and give it 5 stars. So we'll jump right into this presentation now. A lot of it's cute and sweet, a lot of it's kind of difficult to watch. So when I originally put this talk together, I was going to call it Pro-Life 101. It was a rather gentle and inviting title. But the reality for this talk, that's not the title. The real title for this talk is Abortion 101. Everything you need to know about the ugly truth about abortion so that we can help put an end to it. And if we don't know the ugly truth, we can't share that ugly truth with other people. First, we're going to go into the objectives of the talk. First, we're going to talk about the law, whether it's a constitutional right, and this is obviously a very topical issue right now. We'll talk about the science, what actually is the unborn, the procedures, which we're going to go through, which are very difficult. We're going to talk about what is an abortion. We'll talk about the morality, whether it's a moral act, and the response, what you should do. The first question then is why? Why did you all drive here today? Why are we having this conversation? Why is the book written? Well, there are about 62 million reasons why we have to address this issue. 62 million abortions in the U.S. alone since 1973, Roe versus Wade. To give you a perspective, that's more than the populations of California and New York combined. Now, if what's being aborted isn't alive and it's not human, it probably doesn't matter. But if what is being aborted is alive and human, then we have killed over 62 million children in this country, and that's why we raise the issue. We're going to begin with the law. Oh, I'm sorry. My wife, who a lot of you know, who's big in the pro-life movement, she can't stand when I talk about the law. So she has the right to insert slides periodically. So this is one of her slides. Steve, don't. So usually she sits in the back. She's not here tonight, and she does this to me when I go too long. So you guys can do that to me if I go too long. Just give me one of these things here. So that's her slide for the day. Well, I guess she has two slides. So we're going to talk about the beginning of the law. So the Hippocratic Oath, the oath that all physicians take. And Hippocrates says that we are to keep our life and our art pure and holy, and in no way will we ever assist in the procuring of an abortion. Sadly, 89% of medical schools now omit this part of the oath, including the University of Miami, where my wife and I both attended. Next, our country's foundational documents. The Declaration of Independence makes clear our very first foundational right, that being life itself. We're told that this right does not come from government, it comes from our Creator, that this right cannot be taken away. We say this right is unalienable. And the only purpose of government is to secure these rights given to us by a Creator that can't be taken away. Next, the Constitution. And at various points in the Constitution, but here we say, again, giving us our most important foundational right, the right to life itself. Now, when we talk about the Supreme Court, I've said for years, there's 3 cases you need to know. You don't need to know all the details, but that has actually changed now. It's 4 cases we need to know, and we know that why. The first case is going to be Griswold versus Connecticut in 1965. The next case is Roe v. Wade in 73. In 1992 was Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and now, of course, the famous Dobbs decision in this year. Griswold versus Connecticut is famous for declaring that a right to privacy, I should have brought up remote control, that a right to privacy exists in the Constitution. And this is an incredibly profound statement. This fundamental right, this important right exists in the Constitution. And they found that they searched the document and they looked for that word privacy in the document. They found it exactly nowhere. So where exactly did they find this profound fundamental right to privacy? They found it in penumbras. And since you all know what penumbras are, we won't talk about it. Anybody know what a penumbra is? Right. So even the dictionary offers little help. The partially shaded outer region of a shadow cast by an opaque object. So this fundamental, profound right to privacy is found in shadows and opacities, which makes you ask the very important fundamental question, right? So I'm a visual person. I like to think of things visually, and the way I was going to describe this to you all is how did we get this right? And this is the best way I can come up with. I'm sorry. It's magic. It's pulling a rabbit out of a hat. Ta-da. Next, we have Roe v. Wade. Now, I used to talk a lot about Roe v. Wade, but since it's now history is what we're going to talk about, I'm going to try to limit myself. It's very, very difficult. So Roe said, okay, Griswold says there's a right to privacy. We know there's a right to privacy because Griswold said so. We just learned that, right? But Roe says, okay, that right to privacy, it extends to the right of a woman to abort her living child. They set up this strange trimester framework, which was done away with a few years later, so we're not going to go into the details. But very importantly, they said at viability, that's when a baby can live outside the uterus, not unassisted, but when supported by state-of-the-art medical care. At viability, a state may restrict or prohibit abortion if they want to. Not they will, they may. So California, they would never want to restrict or prohibit it. Illinois, no. New York, no. But states may if they want to. And they said, importantly, that a fetus is not a person with respect to the Constitution. And if we can talk about this later on a little bit tonight, still a fetus is not considered a person with respect to the Constitution and therefore is not accorded the rights that are given to persons in the Constitution. There's a point I want to make here. I got rid of most of Roe, but I want to make this really important point, that Roe was radical and outrageous. because it allowed unrestricted abortion if a mother's quote-unquote health was at risk. And the reason this was an unrestricted exception is because of a case decided the very same day of Roe. It was a case called Doe versus Bolton that defined what health is. And health includes emotional well-being. So if at any point during a pregnancy a woman feels distressed, well, she qualifies for an abortion at any point during her pregnancy under Roe. Now, I've not given birth to a child, but I got 5 kids, and I'll just speak for my wife, who's a very courageous woman. The day she takes a positive pregnancy test, which is, it's like week 4, to the moment she delivers, my wife is in distress. So I don't know if that jives with any of the women here, but so you qualify for an abortion at any time under Roe's conditions, which makes this what I've always called the double whammy. The next Supreme Court case we need to know is Planned Parenthood versus Casey. They affirmed Roe's right to abortion. They got rid of that trimester framework, and they put this new test in, which turned out to be very unworkable, and we're not going to go into it, called the undue burden test. And this is the famous case where Justice Anthony Kennedy said, "At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, one's own meaning of the universe, and one's own understanding of the mystery of human life." Now, this is the very definition of what we all call moral relativism, right? That we're all entitled to our own facts, our own truths, and in this case, that there's no scientific or objective definition of life. And as we'll discuss in a few minutes, such an approach to basic science and basic morality is completely unscientific and frankly, objectively immoral. And this is what I call the abortion trifecta. This is Griswold, Roe, and Casey then establishing a nearly unlimited right to abortion at any time for any reason. Now, before going on to the last case, I just want to do a little constitutional law in 3 minutes. And there's a word you hear over and over, and I just want you to be familiar with it. And the reason I go into all these cases is you're going to hear people come up to you when you discuss things. They're going to say, Dobbs was a decision by just wacky religious people. It had no merit whatsoever. And if you don't know the background behind it, you're sort of going to stand there like this. And that's not how we speak for the unborn. So you're going to have these facts in the back of your head a little bit. So we're going to talk about what precedent means, sometimes referred to as stare decisis. They're not exactly synonyms, but pretty close. And that's that a rule that's established in a legal case is binding on all future cases if they have similar issues or similar facts. So I told you Griswold versus Connecticut says there's a fundamental right to privacy. We don't really litigate that every single time the next case comes up. So Roe said, right? They said, well, Griswold says there's privacy. That's precedent. Therefore, we're not going to relitigate it. They can, but they generally don't. So that's what precedent is, and it's very important. But again, I'm a visual person. So what does precedent look like in my mind? Well, this is how I look at it. Precedent is where case law builds on itself. It's solid. It's steady. It's reliable. It's practical. And most importantly, it's defensible. But if precedent is so important, and I said it's that we sort of accept that case law is established, why do we sometimes hear about overturning laws, right? Well, the fact is the Supreme Court has held for years and years and years that there are criteria for overturning precedent. You don't need to know what the criteria are. You just need to know that they exist. And they were, by the way, in this Dobbs decision in detail. And we should thank God because bad precedent the Supreme Court has held is no precedent, or else blacks would not be citizens with respect to the Constitution. Separate but equal facilities, blacks going to one water fountain, whites going to another fountain. So thank God bad precedent is no precedent. So again, if this is what solid precedent looks like, what has abortion precedent looked like? Again, I'm a visual person, and this is how I've always looked at it. So Griswold finds this privacy in these penumbras, right? These shadows and shades and opacities. How strange, right? And then Roe says, oh, these shadows and shades and opacities, they give a woman the right to kill her child. Very strange. And then Casey says, there's no objective definition of life, no scientific definition. Everybody here can decide what their own definition is. Just a wee bit shaky, right? And then along comes, finally, Dobbs in 2022. And I'd love to spend an hour on Dobbs, but you'll all kill me, and if my wife finds out, I'll be in big, big trouble. So Dobbs is the case, very simply, where Mississippi banned abortions after 15 weeks, and the Supreme Court held that Roe and Casey must be overturned. Now, I'm going to focus on one part of this case because you need to know it, because people are going to tell you Dobbs, which is just a bunch of religious wackos, and by the way, most of you I can tell are religious wackos. with a bunch of religious wackos imposing their religion on people, and that's nonsense. And you need to be able to explain to people why it's nonsense. So we need to know a little bit about fundamental liberty rights protected by the Constitution. And there's two types. You don't have to memorize this, but this is something you need to be aware of in your brain. There's two types of fundamental liberty rights. One, enumerated rights. Ones you can read. They're spelled right out in the Constitution. Anybody wants, you can take photos of anything you want here. And these are most of the stuff is online. You can go to it for free. So these are the enumerated rights. They're usually found, for instance, in the first 8 amendments of the Bill of Rights. So you can read them. The free exercise of religion and assembly and of free speech and the right to bear arms. You can read those enumerated rights. But then there's this strange set of implied rights. Implied rights. And there's very complex analysis of how we decide whether a fundamental right is somehow implied in a constitution where it doesn't have that word. Remember, privacy is not found anywhere, but somehow it's implied. So privacy, same-sex marriage, contraception, interstate travel, these are some rights that have been found to be implied. And we have to be careful about that. And there's a quote by Abraham Lincoln I like. Lincoln says, "We all declare for liberty." Sounds wonderful, right? But in using the same word, we do not always mean the same thing. So my neighbor might think he has an incredibly important fundamental liberty right to sunbathe naked on the front yard. You know, my right to not see him sunbathing naked in the front yard probably is my own sense of liberty. I think is a little more important. So we don't all agree what liberty is. And we have to be very careful because when we start finding implied rights in the Constitution, we're asking for trouble. They're prone to abuse. They're prone to controversy. And it's not the role of the courts. I might think a right to privacy is incredibly important. It seems really important to me. The right to privacy, I like that. But if it's not in the Constitution, it's not the job of judges to find it in the Constitution. That's not the role of a judge. It's the role of the legislature, right? So we can pass a law, we can amend the Constitution. It's not the role of the courts to do that. And the last thing, I'll put this in here against my wife's desires. I want you to have heard the test once. So how do they decide whether this right, this implied fundamental right, how do they decide if it's going to be it's going to pass this test? And this is a test from a case called Washington versus Glucksberg. They use this in the Dobbs decision. They say, is this implied right that we're talking about, in this case the right to abortion, is it deeply rooted in our nation's history, and is it implicit in the concept of ordered liberty, which means that if we didn't have this right, liberty as we understand it would be destroyed in our country. And Alito and the majority of the Supreme Court ruled that Roe was egregiously wrong from the start, and Roe and Casey are overturned because abortion is not an implicit, an implied fundamental right in the Constitution. Now, what is the effects then of Dobbs? Is abortion now illegal? No. Abortion is just not prohibited, but it's no longer federally protected. So every state, as we now are hearing, is going to decide in their own legislatures how they're going to make rules for each state. So, for instance, around 25 states are going to limit or prohibit abortion. About 15 states are going to protect the right to abortion probably to the moment of delivery, and about 10 states it's unclear. So Florida, for instance, we've set that the legislature has established that 15 weeks is our cutoff. For good or for bad, where we are right now is 15 weeks is our cutoff. That's the end of the law. Thank you for your patience. So now we're going to talk about the current state of affairs of abortion in this country. So back in 1992, Bill Clinton famously said, and he was explaining the pro-choice's feelings about abortion. He famously said that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. He was acknowledging the seriousness and the sadness that abortion entailed. Those days are long gone because now the mantra is any time for free and for any reason. And now you're supposed to shout your abortion. You can go to abortion parties where you can pose with props. You can be all giddy with your props. You can buy abortion dresses. This is a real thing. Here it says a machine wash in cold water and tumble dry in low heat. You can put your child in an I Love Abortion t-shirt. I thought for sure this was a fake website. It's a real website, and this poor child's going to have to live with this repugnant image for the rest of his life. And one thing I want to make clear, I do a lot of talks outside of religious groups. I'm a wacky Catholic. I go to Mass every day. I play the Rosary. I'm a crazy Catholic. I love, but I do a lot of work outside these church settings. And we tend to think, religious people, that this is a problem in the secular world. That's not true at all. That's not true at all. So here are 3 words that should never go together: Catholic, Mother's Day, and abortion. So this is a problem that's pervasive outside and inside the religious world, which begs the question, how did we get from safe, legal, and rare to shouting your abortion? And I have a couple of theories. The first has to do with these three famous monkeys, the see no evil, the hear no evil, and the speak no evil. So about 50 plus years ago, the sexual revolution took root, and it sought to unmoor sex from the safety net of marriage and family. And these sexual revolutionaries told everybody that sex was liberating, and it was empowering, and it was wonderful, and it was completely without consequences. Well, it turns out there were some rather serious consequences, not the least of which was a surge in unwanted pregnancies outside the safety net of marriage and family. So that left these sexual revolutionaries two options. One, they could say, wow, this experiment we tried backfired, and they could go back to traditional mores, traditional values. Or two, they could just sort of, well, get rid of those darn pregnancies. And we know exactly which route they took, because now sex and sexual self-expression and sexual identity and I don't even know what sexual fluidity is now. I don't know what these things are, but they're the hallmarks of today's modern secular culture. So how do you get rid of those darn pregnancies? Well, you pretend they don't exist. You don't see them, you don't hear them, and you never ever speak about them. And if you deny the truth of abortion for a generation or two, you lose sight of the truth entirely. And that's the theory I've been saying to people for a lot. Carl Trueman, who's a theologian, a Protestant theologian, recently I read an article by him that also gave me another perspective on it, and I liked it a lot. I want to give him credit for it. It has to do with about the modern concept of the self. So modern society tells us about everything's about the self, right? So we have to find ourselves, we have to express ourselves, we have to be true to ourselves, we have to have good self-esteem, and we have to take selfies. You know, I have to show people my tuna fish sandwich that I had for lunch today. It's very important. And the problem is, when self is the only thing that's important to you, then this idea of self-autonomy can be so empowering to these people that they feel they need to crush anything that gets in the way of self, even if it's their own child. And we know that self is also very important, but in a completely different way, right? We believe in self-denial and self-control and self-restraint and self-sacrifice, in selflessness, in giving yourself away in the service of others. And that's the route we take. When we take this modern defective human anthropology, we get what St. John Paul II called the culture of death, where we are blind to the truth, where this baby at 20 weeks by MRI, that any 4-year-old knows this is a baby, right? Well, this is just a clump of cells. This is just a clump of cells because we're blind to the truth. And we are deaf to the truth. Sorry for the volume here. So, again, any 4-year-old knows we're listening to a fetal heartbeat, but now the New York Times says this is not a heartbeat at all, even though we can watch the heart moving. This is embryonic pulsations, because we're deaf to the truth. And we dare not ever speak the truth if we want to maintain this denial. So we believe in rhetorical deception, products of conception and embryonic tissue, and somehow dismembering a baby in the womb is somehow its reproductive health care. And the audacity of this rhetorical deception would be comical if it wasn't so horrifically tragic, where frightened women go into Planned Parenthood clinics and they are asked by the clinicians when they walk in, would you like us to restore your period? Where abortionists give testimony in trial explaining what they do for a living. They safely and effectively empty uterine cavities, rendering women unpregnant. But we all know the truth, right? It's staring right in front of our face. If you need a hint, I'll give you a hint. It rhymes with the word maybe. It wears diapers. It requires lots of wipies. It's, of course, a baby, right? So we're now going to get to the next topic, and that's embryology. We're going to do a little bit of science. We're going to cover week 1 of embryology. We're going to do it in 45 seconds. This is the beginning of life. Here we go. An ovary, a fallopian tube, and a uterus. Walk into a bar. Sorry, that sounds like a joke. So an ovary releases an egg. It's swept up by the fallopian tube. It's met by the sperm. Fertilization occurs, and a living human being with unique DNA is formed. A human being at that precise moment. We call that living human being a zygote. The zygote then travels and divides, becoming a morula, becoming a blastocyst at day 7, end of week 1, it implants in the uterine lining, becoming an embryo. Congratulations, take a bow. You now know more than 99% of the world about week 1 of embryology. A few more definitions. So embryo is going to stay from the end of that week 1 through week 8, and a fetus is going to be from week 9 until birth, but we all know the real name for fetus isn't fetus, right? We all know what the word is. The word is baby, and I prove it with a lot of facts, but this is the one simple fact that whenever you meet a pro-choice woman who is excited about her own pregnancy, you will never, ever, ever be invited to her fetus shower. We know it's a baby. It's only a fetus when you want to destroy it. Next is the term viability, which you've already touched upon, right? So it's the potential to live outside the uterus, but not unassisted when supported by state-of-the-art medical care. So what's viable in Miami isn't viable necessarily in South Sudan. So a woman has a viable baby when she's 31 weeks pregnant in Miami. She gets on an airplane, she flies to South Sudan, she gets off the plane, she no longer has a viable baby. So using viability to decide the rights of a baby or personhood, you understand how bizarre that is, that a plane trip changes the rights of a child, right? The next definition is extremely important for us in the pro-life movement, and you need to have it in your brain, and that is what's alive and what's living. Now, contrary to what the pro-choice movement tells us, whether something is alive or living is not a theoretical question, it's not a religious question, it's not a political question, it's not a philosophical question, and it's not up to your personal feelings on the subject. Whether something is alive or not is a scientific question that science has fully settled, and this is incredibly important. I watched the Dobbs case. So the Dobbs case, one of the justices says, whether a baby's alive in the uterus, that we know that's a religious question. And I wanted the attorney on the pro-life to say, no, it's not. It has nothing to do with religion. It's a scientific question that science has fully answered. The attorney's a brilliant man, but he took the strategy not to do that. But there are criteria that if you meet them, you are alive. Again, don't memorize the list. Know they exist. And what you need to know is all of these criteria are met at conception. And I love a major study done a year and a half ago, the largest study of biologists ever conducted. So over 1,000 worldwide institutions, nearly 6,000 biologists were asked this question: does human life begin at conception? And the answer was, what percentage said yes? Guesses? 96% said life begins at conception. Now the pro-choice movement got very upset. They said this was clearly a very biased study. And in fact, they're right. It was very biased. But it was biased against the pro-life movement, because when these biologists gave their answers, they also had to self-describe themselves. And they are nearly 90% liberal, nearly 90% are pro-choice, and the majority were non-religious. So if this population goes with 96, you know it's nearly 100% for the average population. So we know that life begins at conception. It's a scientific question that science has fully settled. Just to know a few basic developmental milestones. Again, we're doing the background information that any person in the pro-life movement needs to be aware of. So, day 1, as we said, a living human being is with unique DNA, a human being, a person. Week 5, we have a heartbeat. Week 6, brain activity. Week 9, the baby's moving around like crazy, sucking her thumb. Week 13, the body is sensitive to touch, maybe even pain, maybe not, but we're not sure. And Rose said 28 weeks was viability. We talked about viability. Casey said, well, because of advances in maternal fetal medicine, it's now maybe 23 or 24 weeks. And now we're seeing, as medicine gets better and better, we're now around 21 weeks. And I wonder what it's going to be in 50 years, right? So that's something to keep in mind. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So next up I have our baby pictures. I put these up because we need to know what we're talking about. And most people in the pro-choice movement, when they talk about clump of cells, remember I told you you lose sight of the truth after a generation or two? They think it's a clump of cells. They really do. So our job is to bring the truth to them. And so there's a website that goes along with the book in this presentation called speakingfortheunborn.org. It's free, and I paid for the rights for these photos, so download them. As long as you don't publish them, you can use them for your own use. Put them on your phones. When one of your friends says to you, look, 14 weeks is a clump of cells, you can argue with them. And the book here shows you how to do that. Or you can say, do you mind, can you just give me a minute? Can I just show you what a 14-week-old baby looks like? And show them the picture. And they do the same thing every time. They do this. Oh my goodness, I didn't know. Oh my goodness, I didn't know. So have these pictures, because sometimes letting the baby speak for themselves is even a better approach. So They're all found at speakingfortheunborn.org. So I'm just going to quickly, so here's week 8. Again, beautiful anatomic detail. This baby already has a heartbeat, already has brain activity. Here's week 10, a close-up again, beautiful anatomic detail. Here's the baby, again, week 10 in the amniotic sac. We see the umbilical cord that connects the baby to the mother. Week 11, 12, here I find the anatomic detail is stunning. That's just a baby. There's no other word you can come up with for that. That's a baby. Week 13, week 15, I love this picture with the web of vessels and the feet. When my wife is pregnant, she always says this thing, and I never really got it. She said, I'm making feet for socks. And I was like, making feet for socks. And then I saw this picture, I'm like, oh, you're making feet for socks. I get it, you're making feet for socks. This is week 16. This is not unlike a newborn, right? And this is just about the cutoff. We're in Florida. We're at 15 weeks. So a week before, you couldn't destroy that baby in Florida. That's not a clump of cells. Week 20, this is a very famous picture. I did purchase the rights so we could use this here. This is not anything, doesn't look any different than a newborn that you hold. And in any state until this doctor's decision, you can tear the, I hate being so graphic, but you can tear the limbs off this baby. This is a 21-week-old baby. I get emotional when I talk about it. So this is a baby born in San Antonio, Texas. This is Lila. And if you look, you see her arm up there? You see those 2 little bands way up there? You know what those are? Those are her parents' wedding rings. That's how small that baby is. So Rose said, 28 weeks, kill that baby. Casey said 23 or 24 weeks, and now we're at 21 weeks. This is Lila. And we want to know how well Lila did? That's Lila at age 4, thriving, doing just great. So her parents could have aborted her at any time. So again, let these pictures speak for themselves. Have them on your phone. When they say, well, 21-week-old, just say, can I show you a picture of a 21-week-old? Right? In a sweet, gentle way, right? So here's 20-week babies. These are twins. So here you see the little guys moving around, annoying his older brother, who's going to open his mouth in a second and tell him off. He says, like, can you please stop moving around, give me a break, right? That's at 20 weeks. This is at 24 weeks. This is a 24-week clump of cells. Clump of cells. And this one has she has a fascination with her toes. Watch her hand here. She's going to grab her toes. So have these on your phone. These are babies. There's no other word for it. The next video I'm going to show you is a little bit graphic. It's not to horrify you, but it's because I told you I grew up as a secular, pro-choice person, and all my childhood friends are still that way. And so one of my buddies said to me, okay, you've been battering me about this forever, Steve. I know you wrote the book. I know you got this stuff. Look, okay, maybe at 26 weeks, it's a baby. But at 8 weeks, give me a break. Then it really is a clump of tissues. So this is an intraoperative video from an ectopic pregnancy. So we talked about that baby going through the fallopian tube into the uterus. Well, sometimes it gets stuck in the fallopian tube. That is a medical emergency for the mother. That pregnancy cannot be allowed to continue. Usually it will hemorrhage and the mother easily can die. My sister-in-law almost died this last year from that. So that cannot be allowed to continue. So this is an intraoperative video from an ectopic pregnancy that had already started to rupture. And I want you to see what an 8-week-old baby looks like. So that white thing there, those things, that's the doctor's fingers and gloves. And you see the baby. Now look at the fingers and the hands. That's 8 weeks. It's just a baby. I know I'm saying the same thing over and over again, but we got to get this into people's heads. This is how we move hearts. Download this to your phone. You can't show this just to anybody, but if you see the right position, the right time that you can do this with the right person, do this. I was sort of embarrassed having this here. It seemed too graphic, but I realized this baby has saved more lives than anything I could ever do. People who see this video, their hearts are moved dramatically. That's an 8-week-old. So keep that in your mind. So MRI is amazing. Those intraoperative videos are amazing. But we all know the real game changer has been ultrasound, a true window into the uterus that most women get, certainly in this country, multiple times during their pregnancies. And you can see with great anatomic detail the profile of the face and the ears and the lips and the nose and the feet and the fingers and the toes. And this guy's got a thumbs up. He's thrilled you're on his side. This one, I'm probably going a little too long here, but so we see this one is only 12 weeks. Again, only 12 weeks, way beneath the threshold for Florida. And here he is sucking his thumb. right on the side. Look at that heartbeat. I mean, embryonic pulsations. Embryonic pulsations, we can't call it heartbeat now, right? So this is 12 weeks, way below the threshold that Florida allows. And now we have 3D ultrasound, which gets even greater resolution, where we can really see the truth of what we're talking about. And in fact, it's so fascinating to me that now we see that preborn pictures are not much different than postborn pictures, right? A few facts and definitions we need to be aware of. So, the word child. The pro-choice movement hates it when I use the word child, but they have no reasonable objection for it whatsoever. The definition of a child is clear. Merriam-Webster defines it as an unborn or recently born person. Oxford English Dictionary, the same thing, an unborn or newly born human being. The term killing, it has a clear definition. It's the cause of the death of a living thing. I use it all the time. Every once in a while, I wish I didn't use it because I have to gauge the audience. My goal isn't always to stick it to somebody, right? My goal is to win hearts. So sometimes I use the word and sometimes I don't. And when I don't want to use the word killing, and I don't shy away from the truth, I'll say, instead of using the word killing, I'll say it ends the life of a living child. So in some settings, I need to do that. What about the definition of abortion? This is absolutely critical. If you want to take a photograph of this, it's in the book, it's on the website for free. But you need to know what abortion is, and we don't mince words about this. Abortion is the intentional killing of an unborn child. Have that definition at all times, because you're going to hear lots of other nonsense, namby-pamby definitions, and this is the definition, right? And it's consistent, again, even with household dictionaries. You want to go back and take a picture? I saw the look of disappointment on your face. If you go to Merriam-Webster, even Merriam-Webster says it's the termination of a pregnancy resulting in or followed by the death of an embryo, meaning they knew it was alive. Of course, Planned Parenthood tells us it's just a safe procedure that ends a pregnancy. No, it's not. It's the intentional killing of an unborn child. And if there's anything you take home from tonight's talk, don't let anybody tell you abortion is healthcare. Tearing a baby limb from limb inside its mother has nothing to do with healthcare. Don't concede that argument. Never let it go. Never let it go. A few abortion numbers. We talked about the 62 million already. There's a few more I want you to know. The vast majority of abortions occur in the first trimester, about 90%, about 10% or so in the second trimester, and after viability in the third trimester are about 1.3%. And a lot of people argue with me. They say, Steve, stop mentioning the 1.3%. It's a tiny number. Why are you wasting your time with 1.3%? But for me, it's not a tiny number. And again, I'm a visual person, so I think of these babies as people sitting in a stadium, and that's the way I think about it. And 1.3% of 62 million abortions is 750,000 children. That's 9 stadiums of dead children. And the most horrifying fact is that the majority of late-term abortions are performed on healthy babies of healthy mothers. It's just a fact. It's just a fact. The White House, Meet the Press, Chuck Todd, this week said the exact opposite on Meet the Press. He said it's for medical emergencies. It's not for medical emergencies. It's of healthy babies, of healthy mothers. We should know that. Next up is the difficult part of this talk. It's going to be about 7 minutes long. We need to go through the abortion procedures. Again, the truth of abortion is what we're passing on to people. And so I'm going to show you a series of animations. They're not videos from abortions. They're animations. And even though they're animations, they're terribly, terribly difficult to watch. If you can't watch it, I don't blame you. You can step outside for a minute. You can just close your eyes if you can't watch it. They're very difficult to watch, but if we don't know the truth about abortion, we can't pass this truth on. So we're going to start with medical abortions, which are now suddenly the most common form of abortion, up from what was around 30% 4 years ago to now 54% of abortions that came out this month. Last month, they said. This is up to week 10 of abortions. These videos were made by a former abortionist, Dr. Anthony Levatino. And so I don't know how the volume is going to be here. Let's see if the volume is going to be okay. So this is a first trimester abortion.
This is a procedure in which the mother swallows pills in order to terminate her baby, and it is performed up to the 10th week of pregnancy. The procedure involves 2 steps. Step 1. At the abortion clinic or doctor's office, the woman takes pills which contain mifepristone, also called RU46. RU46 blocks the action of a hormone called progesterone. Progesterone is naturally produced in the mother's body to stabilize the lining of the uterus. When RU46 blocks progesterone, the lining of the mother's uterus breaks down, cutting off blood and nourishment to the baby, who then dies inside the mother's womb. Step 2. 24 to 48 hours after taking RU46, the woman takes misoprostol, also called Cytotec, that is administered either orally or vaginally. RU46 and misoprostol together cause severe cramping, contractions, and often heavy bleeding to force the dead baby out of the woman's uterus. The process can be very intense and painful, and the bleeding and This is the most frequently performed abortion and is used typically from 5 to 13 weeks of pregnancy. The abortionist uses a series of metal rods called dilators, like these, which increase in thickness, and inserts them into the cervix to dilate it, gaining access to the inside of the uterus where the baby resides. The baby has a heartbeat, fingers, toes, arms, and legs, but its bones are still weak and fragile. The abortionist takes a suction catheter, like this one. This is a 14 French suction catheter. It's clear plastic, about 9 inches long, and it has a hole through the center. It is inserted through the cervix into the uterus. The suction machine is then turned on with a force 10 to 20 times more powerful than your household vacuum cleaner. The baby is rapidly torn apart by the force of the suction and squeezed through this tubing down into the suction machine, followed by the placenta. A Dini is performed between 13 and 24 weeks of pregnancy. Once the cervix has been stretched open, the suction tube is placed inside. The suction machine is turned on, and pale yellow amniotic fluid surrounding the baby is suctioned out through the catheters. With babies this big, they don't fit through catheters this size. The baby's bones and skull are too strong to be torn apart by suction alone. This is a Sofer clamp. The abortionist uses this clamp to grasp an arm or leg. Once he has a firm grip, the abortionist pulls hard in order to tear the limb from the baby's body. One by one, the rest of the limbs are removed, along with the intestines, the spine, and the heart and lungs. Usually the most difficult part of the procedure is extracting the baby's head, which is about the size of a large plum at 20 weeks. The head is grasped and crushed. The abortionist knows he has crushed the skull when a white substance comes out of the cervix. This was the baby's brains. The abortionist then removes skull pieces. He removes the placenta and any leftover parts of the baby with a curette, scraping the lining of the uterus for any remaining tissue. The abortionist then collects the baby parts and reassembles them to make sure that there are 2 arms, 2 legs, and all the pieces. Once all the parts have been accounted for, the abortion is complete.
Truth about abortion.
Today I'm going to describe a trimester-induced abortion, which is performed at 25 weeks to term. At this point, the baby is almost fully developed and viable, meaning he or she could survive outside the womb if the mother were to go into labor prematurely. Because the baby is so large and developed, this procedure takes 3 or 4 days to complete. On day 1, the abortionist uses a large needle to inject a drug called digoxin. The abortionist inserts the needle with the digoxin through the woman's abdomen or through her vagina and into the baby, targeting either the head, torso, or heart. The baby will feel it. Babies at this stage feel pain. When the needle pierces the baby's body and the digoxin takes effect, the life of the baby will end. The abortionist then inserts multiple sticks of seaweed called laminaria into the woman's cervix. They will slowly open up the cervix for delivery of a stillborn baby. While the woman waits for the laminaria to dilate her cervix, she carries her dead baby inside of her for 2 to 3 days. On day 2, the abortionist replaces the laminaria and may perform a second ultrasound to ensure the baby is dead. If the child is still alive, he administers another lethal dose of digoxin. The woman then goes back to where she is staying while her cervix continues to dilate. If she goes into labor and is unable to make it to the clinic in time, she will give birth at home or in a hotel. In this case, she may be advised to deliver her baby into a bathroom toilet. The abortionist then comes to remove the baby and clean up. If she can make it to the clinic, she will do so during her severest contractions and deliver her dead son or daughter. If the baby does not come out whole, then the procedure becomes a D&E, a dilation and evacuation, and the abortionist uses clamps and forceps to dismember the baby, piece by piece. Once the placenta and all the body parts have been removed, the abortion is complete.
Thankfully, that's the last of the animations. On the website, you can download these to your phone. Be very careful who you show these to, but there's definitely an appropriate time with certain people that you can show them. So when somebody says to you, reproductive health care, this is just a benign procedure, you can say, if it's the right setting, do you mind if I show you just an animation of what a second trimester abortion is? And there are videos on the internet of people watching these animations now, of people that are gung-ho pro-choice, gung-ho pro-abortion, and then they're sobbing when they finish watching these videos, and they say, I had no idea, I had no idea. It's our job to make sure they have some idea. That's why we do these difficult videos. Very briefly, partial birth abortion, no animation. I'm just going to show it because the Health and Human Services Secretary for this administration is for it. Planned Parenthood is for it. I just want you to know what it is. I'm going to show you a few drawings only. So this is a viable child. The leg is forcibly delivered. The body is then pulled out forcibly. As long as the head is still in the birth canal, we claim legally the baby isn't alive. So you can stick in a scissors, sever the brainstem, suck out the brain, deliver the dead baby. We're done with the gross part. I apologize. You need to know that Planned Parenthood supports this. Javier Becerra with the current administration supports this. We have to point out how gruesome these things are. Next, I want you to know five facts about Planned Parenthood, not just because they're the leading killer of babies in this country, but they're the most vocal advocates for abortion worldwide. So here are 5 facts you need to know. Number 1, they are the most prolific killer of unborn children in this country. It's about 1/3 of a million babies every year. That's one baby every 97 seconds. Fact number 2, it's the reason for their existence. They spend millions of dollars trying to tell you that their core mission is women's health care. Their most recent past president admitted otherwise, that their mission is to expand access to abortion. Fact number 3, and this is very topical today, Planned Parenthood has very proudly racist origins, which are devastating blacks and minorities today. It was founded by Margaret Sanger, who was an extremely proud racist and a very proud eugenicist, who believed, she wanted to eliminate indiscriminate breeding, as she said, by minorities, who she called human weeds. And her plan has worked remarkably well because nearly 80% of Planned Parenthood centers are in minority neighborhoods. Abortion is now the #1 killer of black lives in America. That's more than heart disease, that's more than violence, and cancer combined. Fact number 4, Planned Parenthood aborts unborn children and then sells their body parts for profit. They call this reasonable reimbursement for tissue donation services. Undercover video proves otherwise, and in fact, a former director of Planned Parenthood in Houston testifies her center alone profited $1 million a year from reasonable reimbursement for tissue donation services. Fact number 5, Planned Parenthood is financed with our tax dollars, $500 million a year. It's always had a fundamental restriction, even though it's not really a restriction, called the Hyde Amendment, where we can't use this money directly for abortion-related services. The current administration and the Democratic Party are trying very hard to abandon the Hyde Amendment, which has had bipartisan support for the last 40 years. So when someone says to you, Planned Parenthood is a wonderful organization, I would like you to say they're the most prolific killer of unborn children, particularly the children of blacks and minorities, and that they then sell their bodies for profit. That's Planned Parenthood. And if somebody says to you, and I get this a lot, but don't they also provide some very important medical things, like they do HIV testing, they do pap smears? And I say, yeah, they do some nice things, right? But I can't be supportive of the pap smear going on in room A while a baby is being dismembered in room B. It's that simple. Now, finally, we're getting to a new topic, and I'm going a little long here, I apologize. So Roe's dead. Roe v. Wade is dead. So we're done now? No. It's not the end of the movement. It's just the end of the beginning of our movement. Because the unborn have no rights. So the mothers have had certain rights. We learned that states, if they wanted to, had rights. Remember, after viability, but New York wouldn't have taken that up. But they have rights if they want to. But the unborn have never had rights, and to this day, they do not have any rights. And finally, where do we go from here? And what should you do? Well, our job is to take those people who are blind and deaf and will not speak the truth, and our job, or better yet, this is the more appropriate image, our job is to open those eyes and open those ears and to speak the truth with this information that we're learning here tonight. So when this video image is being played in a sex ed program in public schools for girls between the ages of 10 and 14, and the voiceover at this point of the video says, the pregnancy tissue is then passed. Our job is to say, hey, this is that pregnancy tissue. This is that pregnancy tissue. So our job is to bring the truth. So it's more than ever, now is the time for us to begin speaking for the unborn. And we have to find a way to open hearts. And I used to say that a lot, and then finally somebody raised their hand, they say, well, what the heck does that mean? Sounds pretty, opening hearts, but what does that mean? And I thought about it, and this is what I mean. It would be great if you tell me you're pro-choice, and then I say, well, here's my great argument. And then you say, wow, Steve, wow, that's so impressive. You're so great. I'm now pro-life. That'd be wonderful. That rarely happens. But there are magic words that I want to hear. And this is always my goal. And so everything that I do is directed to hearing this statement. I want somebody to say after a discussion with me, you know, Steve, that's interesting. I'd never really thought about it that way before. And to me, that's a huge breakthrough. That's the sound of the heart opening to the truth. So let's talk a little bit about strategy. So we now have our background information. We have the law, we have the science, we have our embryology, right? Let's talk about where we focus our efforts. Well, if you're Ben Shapiro, you go into a stadium with a microphone and you combat 1,000 people screaming at you, that's great. I can't do that. Probably you can't do that either. If you're a legislator in the Florida or National Congress and you can pass laws, that's fantastic, but that's not me and that's not most of you. If you're an appellate court lawyer, that's great. You go in and fight at Supreme Court, that's great. But that's not what 99.9% of us can do. But each of us has a very important role to play, and that's in the normal, everyday circumstances of our lives. That's with our families, our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, one person at a time. That's where we speak. What about how we speak? Well, we always speak charitably, which is not easy in this thing. You're getting yelled at a lot, and I get hot under the collar when I get frustrated with people. We're always charitable. We're always intelligent. We're persuasive. And remember, we're winning hearts, not arguments. Sometimes to win a heart, you need to lose the argument. I've written a book. I'm really good at arguing now. Not because I'm smart, just because I've done it so much. So I could probably stick it to you. But that's not going to bring you to my side. That's not going to bring people to my side. My goal always to win hearts. Steve, that's interesting. I never thought about it that way before. How do I get there? How do I get there? We're brief. We're clear. We're articulate, and we are always mindful that. And this is a real statistic. And I've gotten multiple people question this, and I've gone to multiple sources. About a quarter of the women we're going to speak with have already had an abortion. They are our mothers. They are our wives. They are our sisters. They are some of our adult children. They are some of the people in this room. And those women deserve our compassion because every one of us, and I know I'm speaking for myself, has made big mistakes in this world. Now, thank God I've been spared the issue of abortion in my life. But I've made some terrible mistakes that have had big consequences in my life. And I want to learn from them, I want to move forward, and I don't want to be castigated at all times for it. I paid a price already for them. So these women deserve our compassion, and we want to bring them on our side. Now, I like this next thing. My wife and I argue about the next thing, and I love that a priest is here while we do this. I make this very compelling argument, I think, that I'm a wacky Catholic. I love my faith. It informs everything that I do, but I make no religious arguments when I'm talking in the pro-life world. Unless I'm debating a religious person, which happens every once in a while, and then the catechism is fantastic. We have a lot of fantastic religious arguments to make, but I don't use them because 98% of the people we're arguing with and debating with are secular, atheist people that think the religious people we're wacky, we're brainwashed, we're morons, we're intolerant, wacky Jesus freaks. And if you've made 8 great arguments based on science and the law and ethics and social justice concerns, but then you accidentally say the word God or sanctity of life or the Bible or sin, you'll see the face of the person you're talking with change dramatically. And you can read their mind immediately. And their mind is saying like this. I was just impressing them with 8 arguments, and then they look at me after I say sin, and they say, oh, Steve, sorry, I hadn't realized You're a freak. Have a nice day. And all those great 8 arguments that I made that were so persuasive just vanish along with the religious argument I made. So I find that making a religious argument 99% of the time is handing my opponent a giant club with which to beat me over the head. We have so many powerful and persuasive non-religious arguments. I say we stick to them. But I make this point here because I'm in a Catholic environment. It doesn't mean that my faith doesn't inform everything I do in this form of apostolate. I don't want to get too wacky in my faith, but we have a long tradition of what we do. I always race out to do stuff, and a very dear friend of mine who's a priest says to me, Steve, hey, slow down. There's a formula. 65% of what you do, stop and pray. Get inspired by the Holy Spirit. Get directed. Then make a sacrifice. You're going to go talk to your best friend who's still pro-choice? Make a sacrifice that day. We call it offering it up in our tradition, right? So we don't have to go beat ourselves, but maybe I didn't put, Lord, I need direction, and I'm going to make a sacrifice for my friend Andy. I'm not going to put sugar in my coffee this morning. It's a little sacrifice. It's a small little thing, but that's our faith. I offer it up. And then, that's maybe 20%. So then I've got 15% left. Then I can race out and do my stuff. So do I bring my faith into everything that I do? You bet I do. But I don't use religious terms when I'm making those arguments. I think it's a very, very important thing that we do that. Having said that, I'm wrong all the time, so judge yourself. And this brings us now to the book. When I was putting this book together, I took every pro-choice argument I'd ever heard in my life, I compiled them, I organized them, and then I started collecting and organizing and editing the rebuttals. And as I was doing this, my wife said, well, you should put why you're pro-life. And I said, well, of course I know why I'm pro-life. I'm pro-life because abortion is wrong, and because abortion's wrong. It's a terrible thing. It's wrong. And I realized I couldn't even articulate why it's wrong. So I stopped and I said, okay, I'm going to prepare something so that when somebody says to me, and I get this all the time, they find if you're intelligent and pro-life, they can't imagine why that's the case, right? You're a doctor and you're pro-life, they can't imagine that. You're a lawyer and you're pro-life, you can't imagine that. Only wacko Catholic, priests are supposed to be pro-life. So I put together what I call my 30-second summary of why I'm pro-life. The question comes up all the time. The opportunity comes up all the time. It's when you least expect it. You might get one chance to make your case. Make it count. So I have my 30-second summary, and I've memorized it, and I use it all the time. So this is my 30-second summary. Make your own. Steal mine. It's in the book. It's on the website. Modify it to make it work for you. This is what I say. So if somebody says to me, you're pro-life, Steve? Why are you pro-life? I say I'm pro-life because I'm pro-science. Because there's overwhelming scientific consensus that life begins at conception. And I'm pro-life because social justice begins in the womb. Because every living human being is entitled to the most fundamental of human rights, that being life itself. Because being a burden on someone is never justification for killing them. And I'm pro-life because I'm pro-woman. Because abortion degrades women, treating their fertility as a defect and enabling men to use and then abandon women at their most vulnerable. Abortion never empowers women, but it does empower the men who wish to exploit them. And I'm pro-life because I'm against violence. Abortion is not only immoral, but is an act of extreme violence against the most vulnerable. And I'm pro-life because of the visible evidence, because ultrasound and now MRI, as we just learned, right, finally revealed to the world what's moving inside a woman's body, and that's a living baby. And lastly, I'm pro-life because of moral conscience. If abortion is the killing of an innocent unborn child, then it's immoral and cowardly to remain silent. And then I always finish, and I say, that's why I'm pro-life, and then I always say this, and why aren't you? And I get the same response, always. It goes like this. They're completely at a loss for words because they don't really have much to argue. And they're not prepared. But I've learned that most of us in this room, including me until last year, were also unprepared. So have your 30-second summary, steal mine, modify it, make it work for you. It comes up all the time. We have such persuasive and powerful arguments based on science and facts and the truth. And they're winning arguments. So we must be able to articulate our reasons to anybody who asks us. So in this book, I have, for every argument, I have multiple rebuttals. I have a lot of degrees behind my name, and so people, very politely call me doctor, doctor, doctor. I just go by Steve. My wife is brilliant. My IQ, if you test me, is very, very average. So I write for the average person. I just work hard. So these arguments are really accessible. You don't have to memorize them. You sort of learn them as bullet points, and you practice them, especially with somebody else, with with a husband, a wife, a good friend. We've done workshops with kids in high schools where they would always have pizza at the high school, and you put them in rows against each other. You say, okay, now you're pro-choice, go to page 24, make your argument. Now you're pro-life, and you switch. So you rehearse these arguments, and you start to get them into your brain. So they make their pro-choice arguments, and we're ready with the pro-life rebuttals. And as I said, we have facts, science, and truth on our side, which, this is my big animation, by the way, and my big techno animation here, which outweighs cliches and this deception and ad hominem, or what we call personal attacks, every time. Facts, science, and truth. That's my big animation. Thank you very much. So it's exciting that facts, science, and truth are so wonderful, and they excite this kid very much as well. And you too should feel very excited to be a part of this wonderful, wonderful movement. It's a winning movement. It's exciting. I do a lot of apostolate for my faith, and it's very frustrating. Maybe I'm not good at it, but I go out there all the time, and I really want to convert people to Catholicism. And when we do our apostolate work, we don't know where the fruits. We plant a seed, and maybe we see it in a month, maybe you see it in 5 years, maybe you never see it, maybe your grandkids might see it. It's difficult for me. That's not the case here. It's amazing how successful our arguments are, and you convert people all the time. Maybe not all the way, but I've met only 2 people in my life so far in the last 5 years that I can't get who are radically pro-choice down to 12 weeks. That's a huge step. That's a huge step, and not because I'm brilliant, just because the arguments are persuasive. Learn your arguments. So I took all the arguments, I put them into 8 categories so we could organize a response. And these are the 8 arguments, the categories of arguments that the pro-choice people make. They say it's not alive, not a human, not a person, that clump of cells argument, right? They talk about women's autonomy and my body, my choice. They talk about not imposing your personal beliefs on other people, that women shouldn't have to bear the burden and the hardship of pregnancies, that you're just a misogynist. You don't even like women. You're just mean. You hate women. We get that all the time. Somehow I've got 5 kids. I got 2 daughters and a wife, and somehow I'm a misogynist. I'm not sure, as though I don't care about my own family. That abortion somehow empowers women. That it's best for society and unwanted babies. And then there's a category of a miscellaneous category. So these are the arguments, and let me tell you, they really tick this guy off. But they motivate this guy to fight back, which is what we do with this presentation and this book. So they're going to argue, and we're going to reply. And our replies look like this. They're concise, 30 seconds long. They're persuasive. So when someone says to you, a fetus or an embryo is not alive, it's just a clump of cells, well, you have your rebuttal. That's one of the rebuttals, one of the bullet points. You have your sources and citations, because most of these I've stolen from other people and mixed up 3 people's and combined them and edited them and modified them. And then after that, maybe you, blow them a kiss. And so when somebody says to you, a woman has the right to control her own body, well, you can give her your rebuttal. There's multiple rebuttals in the book. They're very persuasive. You have your sources and citations. Or you might pull out your phone, because you downloaded from speakingfortheunborn.org your free images. And you might say, hey, can I show you an image? Because I do respect a mom's body, but the problem is there's 2 bodies. There's mom's body and there's somebody else's body, and I don't feel comfortable tearing off the arms of that baby. Do you feel comfortable doing that? And most people will say to you, remember, the pro-choice people aren't bad people. They're just wrong. There's a big difference. They're wrong. We're not embarrassed to call people right and wrong. So it's very rare you meet bad people. They're just wrong. So I say to them, I can't imagine feeling comfortable tearing off the leg. Do you feel comfortable? And most people are going to tell you, well, I guess you got a point. Well, I'm not sure. I have to think about that. That's the heart opening. That's interesting, Steve. I hadn't thought about it that way before. So have those on your phone. So when somebody says to you, you're just anti-woman, Steve, I say, no, I'm not anti-woman. I'm just anti-killing. And since nearly 500,000 baby girls are aborted each year, my position is fiercely pro-woman. And again, I've got my sources and citations. And I've got all my images I've downloaded, please, from that site. And I always sort of end these presentations with one point that I think is really important, that as members of the pro-life movement, we have to be involved in much more than simply banning abortion, because abortion isn't a sign that women are free, but a sign that they are desperate. And it would be great if a single argument wins people over all the time, and it usually doesn't, but if they're carefully put together in a compassionate, kind, thoughtful, persuasive way, what you will find yourself is you're forming a coherent picture of the truth, and that's how we protect these, our most vulnerable children. And if you need one more reminder while we're doing this, and I don't know how our audio is here, but I've seen this a billion times, and I love this every time I do this. Here's the other reminder why we're doing all this. Oops, maybe I can't play the video. I'm going to have to actually get out of that mode. Uh-oh, I'm not getting the thing. I had my beautiful video, and I can't seem to do it.
You can do it, Steve!
Because whether inside or outside the uterus, we're simply talking about babies. I thank you for your kind attention. It's time for us all to get to work. This has been all you need to know to begin using the arguments for the book. Again, the book is for sale. I was told that if you showed up here, everybody would buy 20 copies, so I'll hold you to that. That's great. If you have the ability to buy a book, that's great. If you do not have money and it's not a good time or you didn't bring cash, just steal a book from me. I'll pay for it. I don't care. I don't take a penny for it. I want that out there just as a favor to me. If you can go to Amazon, it really is important to rate those books. If you can remember to do that tomorrow, that would be a great help to me. I thank you for your time. We can do question and answers. You can ask me any question you want. You can fire questions. You can debate me. You can argue against me. You can complain. You can criticize or give suggestions. I'm open to any questions or any thoughts that anybody has. Yes, sir.
If you could make changes from our present situation, what would they be?
From a national perspective, where we are? Okay, that's it. I have another talk that if anybody wants to stay, I could give a 5-minute talk that I'm working on right now. So I call it Life After Roe. I'm radically pro-life. If I could magically make it so that abortion is completely illegal from the moment of conception, that's what I want. If I went back to 1861, I'd like to think I would be, but maybe I wouldn't have been in that time. I'd like to be radically against slavery. Abraham Lincoln, in his first inaugural address, said, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, he said, "I have no intention of abolishing slavery, and if I did, I have no legal case to do so." 4 years later, his second inaugural address, he's saying, "How dare we live off the sweat of other people's work, on the brow of other people's work?" He knew incrementalism was the way you get to where we needed to be. Until you could bring the population, enough people to your side, you couldn't change the law radically. I'm a big believer in incrementalism. When Roe was overturned, 90% of the pro-life movement was left flat-footed, stunned, and unsure what to do next, including me. And I was making a presentation saying we need to ban abortion, abolish abortion, and I realized it was a great vehicle by which the other side was making us look at those radical wackos. And you saw in Kansas, the referendum, a very Republican state, a very pro-life state, decided to allow abortions and almost unrestricted abortions because they were caught flat-footed, and the other side made them look radical, and people were not ready. If you look at polling consistently shows, and polling is controversial on this issue, but this one is clear. A vast majority of Americans believe the right to abortion should exist for the first 12 weeks and probably shouldn't exist after the first 12 weeks. Did I say 12 or 12? Yeah, I hope I said that correctly. So what I've decided is if you ask me my opinion, and I've got it in this other presentation, I say I'm pro-life and I'm against abortion, and I usually say in almost every circumstance. I'm probably for all circumstances, in almost every circumstance, but I also realize that a significant percentage of the country doesn't agree with me. So at this point in time, since the majority of people think abortion after 12 weeks is wrong, that might be a good starting place for us to begin. That's where I am. It's difficult for me to say that. I had to practice that over and over because I'm pro-life. I'm pro-life, I don't like that, but I strongly feel, and even my wife, who's more radical than I am, says, you make a point. And I try not to go into politics, but if you're a DeSantis fan, and it doesn't matter whether you are or not, there's something to be said for him coming from a state where there's quote-unquote moderation. That somebody will say, you're a radical, crazy pro-lifer. You can say, I come from a state where we believe in compromise. The state, we're at 15 weeks, which seems pretty moderate to me. So it might be a long-term winning strategy. So am I radically pro-life? Do I want to end all abortion? That's my end game. To get there, I believe in incrementalism. And I think we have to go there. It's a big tent, and there's room for differing opinions, and I'm wrong all the time in life. I've learned that the older I get, the more often I'm wrong, or more often I realize I'm wrong. But that's where I feel strongly about it. We need to bring people to our side. And if I say to my buddy, let me show you what a 12-weeker looks like, I think I can't agree with you anything after 12 weeks. I just can't. Look at a 12-weeker. And he says, yeah, I see that video, Steve. I see your point. As opposed to me saying, all abortions, I'm against everything. And rape, and the 12-year-old who was raped, she can't have an abortion. I might be against a 12-year-old rape victim getting an abortion, but that makes me look radical. And when we talk about prosecuting women who are getting abortions or prosecuting them for going across state lines, we can be made to look like radical wackos really quickly, and we're going to lose the battle. We're going to lose the battle. I still feel strongly about that. So I believe in incrementalism. I think 12 weeks is where the population is, and I think if I get everybody to 12 weeks over 5 years, that means I've got people to respect life. I've got them to think of babies at 12 weeks. Then maybe after 5 years, I'm going to say, you know what, 12 weeks, we started at 12 weeks, but let me show you what an 8-week-old baby looks like. Maybe go to 8 weeks. Then I'm at 4 weeks. And then it doesn't seem so difficult to go to no abortions. So that's where I stand.
What happens if the mother's life is in danger and she's like 2 weeks before term?
Okay, so that's another place where we've failed. So there are no states that have restricted abortion after viability that have not had exceptions for the life and even the health of the mother. But we've not articulated it, and I don't like to say the left, but the pro-choice side has confused enough people that even doctors, physicians who take care of women are not sure if they're going to be breaking the law. So we need to be very clear. Now, it gets complicated. We talk about Catholic moral theology. So for instance, when you have an ectopic pregnancy, the Catholic approach is we cut the tube that contains the mother, that contains the ectopic pregnancy. We don't go in there and pluck out the baby because that's the direct killing of a baby, and we don't believe in that as Catholics. We believe in cutting out the tube. We treat the mother. The secondary effect, the double effect, is that as an incidental result of treating the mother's life, the baby unfortunately died. That's Catholic moral theology. I don't have to impose my Catholic moral principles upon people. If a woman's life is in danger, the pro-life movement has always prioritized the born over the unborn. If a woman is 26 weeks pregnant and she has aggressive breast cancer and she wants the chemotherapy in the 3rd trimester, I would say to her, let's try delivering the baby. 26 weeks, that baby might live. Maybe hold on 3 weeks. 3 weeks shouldn't make a difference. Let's try to bring you to that baby to better viability, and let's deliver that baby. But we need to be clear. We can't appear radical. When somebody says to me, you don't believe in saving the life of the mother? I say, absolutely I do. And if you find a pro-life guy who doesn't agree with me, let me know, because I'm going to go find him. I want to talk with him right now. I agree with you completely. Where we find agreement, let's agree with the other side. That's how we win hearts. So let's be clear. Let's be clear with people on both sides. We prioritize the born over the unborn always. If a mother says, hey, I'm 12 weeks pregnant, I'm going to hold off on my chemotherapy and put my life in God's hands, that's wonderful. That's the mother's decision to make. I'm not going to impose that upon her. Okay, so the first argument I always get when debating is always about rape and incest. And what I say to somebody is, they always say, do you believe that a woman should be able to, is raped, has to carry the baby? I always say, if that's your concern, there's 3 main points I make. The first one, I learned the hard way. I get a lot of feedback from people. You can reach me on my website, and if you read the book and there's something you don't like or you have a better idea, please reach me through the website, because I like better ideas, and the 3rd printing is coming out now with lots of ideas that people have given me. So somebody said to me, Steve, your section on rape and incest doesn't sound very compassionate, and women have been raped and incest, and you don't sound so compassionate. So first point I make now, if somebody argues with me about rape and incest, I think that person might have been raped or a victim of incest. So the first words, my overwhelming response is compassion, respect, and kindness. Because somebody made that's the first thing I think about. The second thing I say, if I realize they're just doing the gotcha thing, rape and incest, I would say, look, rape and incest account for less than 0.5% of abortions. So if that's your objection, then I want to congratulate you for being pro-life for the other 99.5% of the cases. It turns out you and I have so much in common, 99.5% of the cases. I'm sure we can find some agreement and compromise on that 0.5%. And in today's era, I want to be moderate and reasonable. I can make great arguments why a rape, when does one act of violence, when is an act of violence ever solved by another act of violence? That a child is a child irrespective of how it was conceived. There's lots of wonderful arguments to make. But I don't need to appear radical to people. That's a tiny percentage. If I can stop the other 99.5% of abortions right now, that's where I want to go. That's where I'm focusing during this intermediate time with people. But the arguments are compelling. Why? There's tons of women out there. Go to a March for Life, and they're holding signs. I was conceived by rape. My life is worth living, and my mother is so proud. There's a million wonderful arguments, and there's support groups for those people right there that are in that situation. They're tremendously compelling arguments to make. I stay at right now. I think it's so important we appear moderate that I find where we agree, and I say, "Wow, you're pro-life then." For the other 99.5% of cases, and they say, "Well, not really." Then I said, "Why'd you bring up rape as incest as your first argument?" I said, "Give me your best argument. Give me your best." They always pick the esoteric ones. Yes, sir.
How would you assess media on this subject?
We don't know why academia. I mean, there's theories. Why is academia so? I know. Why is academia so liberal? Why is media so liberal? I don't know. We're fighting a losing game if we plan on fighting them, because they're an overwhelming group of people with immense power, social media especially. Again, it always comes back to winning hearts, and it's one person at a time. You have to convince your daughter-in-law, who might be pro-choice. That's where you focus in. You're going to be battling media. You're going to be battling social media and Facebook and TikTok and all these things. I say, I'm not going to worry about who's fighting me right now. I am worried about my best friend is Andy. Been my best friend for 45 years. He's still pro-choice. I talk with him. I can't get him to read my whole book. That's the one I'm working on. I'm not working on the global picture. I'm going to let Ben Shapiro's worry about the media fight. If there's a way to fight them, that's great, and I'll take all your suggestions. But I wrote a book to try to do things. I tell anybody, I'll speak anywhere you want. If you can bring me 2 people, I'll come. You got a huge crowd, that's great. I usually come for 2 people. I lug my own screen usually, my own projector. I've got this wonderful man over here who's devoted his time here to do this. My speaking rates are really relatively inexpensive. I speak for free, so it works out well. That's what I can do. But in the everyday circumstances of your ordinary lives is where we win this battle. And right now it's 15 weeks in Florida. When we all convince our neighbors that 12 weeks sounds better, then we can change it to 12, and then we can change it to 8. And we waited 50 years to overturn Roe. If it takes 50 years, we're in the game for 50 years. Whatever it takes, we're patient people. We've been Christians for 2,000 years. Yes, sir.
By way of an endorsement, I would encourage everyone to use his book on social media, because it's a great resource to come up with arguments very quickly, very precisely, and the arguments being different lengths. Some are great for tweeting, some are great for Facebook, some are great for Instagram, and it's a great resource. So I would encourage you to have it handy and just pull it out, look for the argument, and you can get back immediately to people that are making pro-choice arguments. The second thing I would say is Catholics, we have, the benefit of having Thomistic logic that we can resort to. And in this case, the issue of, how would St. Thomas Aquinas argue this? And I would say, killing an innocent human being is always wrong. Abortion always kills an innocent human being. Therefore, abortion is always wrong. And using that argument, the only word that people can argue is the word be. It's always innocent, it's always human, and anything else. And again, your book on social media has gotten me by making the really smart.
Thank you. One of the things we're trying to do, I say we, because it sounds more important, but it's just me. I want to get this book into high schools, and shockingly, I'm so thrilled that this church here, this parish has invited me here. It's wonderful. I have a terrible time. I cannot get into even Catholic high schools. It's so difficult to speak to Catholic high schools. You think it'll be an easy mission. They're supposed to be pro-life. Nobody wants to speak on the subject. I'm free, and I'll show up. I'll even take a day off of work if I have to do so. So I found there's 2 schools that I have a close association with up in the DC area. So I'm going to give a shortened talk of 25 minutes to the group, and then we're going to do 2 working sessions with the book where they actually get to use them. Because if I hand this book out to a bunch of 16 to 18-year-olds, the 11th and 12th graders, when they leave the room, half of them are going to be on their seats. But if they use that book, so you have pizza, you've got your sodas, and you have a fun time joking around where you say, okay, your side of the room, you go to page 26, you're all pro-life. You guys are all pro-choice. Let them argue. And they say, okay, flip. Now you switch. Then they're giggling and they're happy. Then they're armed when they leave the Catholic high school and they're out in the secular world and colleges and the workforce, they got their booklets in their back pocket. They know their arguments, they're ready to use it. So I think if we have, and then we're gonna make a little promotional 90-second video, done really well of what this is, and then hopefully I can get the Catholic schools, when they see it and endorsed by a few Catholic schools who have done it, then I hope it'll be better. I mean, I've been super lucky through my wife, who's more of a bigwig than I am. We have Bishop Barron and Archbishop Wensky and Archbishop Cardinal Dolan and Archbishop Gomez and George Weigel have all endorsed this book. I still can't get into Berlin. I'm friends with Father Willie for years. I can't get into Berlin. And I'm not embarrassed to say the name over and over. I can't get into Berlin. I can't get to Berlin. My kids went to Berlin. So if you have palanca, as we say in Spanish, push it and get me into your schools. And I'll make it more age appropriate depending on the group that I'm working with. But the kids need to spread the message. I'm an old man. Yes, ma'am. Agree completely. Fantastic idea. So I do a lot of speaking at leadership forums for high schools. And the kids get enthused and excited, and they know they're so much more savvy than I could ever be. So they get this message out. I've also done it for the Newman Centers at University of Pennsylvania, and I've done it at the Newman Center here at Miami, where I'm trying to get the young college. I just did a young college group at St. Augustine last weekend. So I'm trying to get the kids motivated. I wish I was Ben Shapiro with 2 million Twitter followers, and I could start getting reaching people to do these things. I'm just an old man with a microphone here.
I want to compliment you as a Black woman.
Yes, ma'am.
For speaking out about the fact that Margaret and Sam is so proud were the genesis of Planned Parenthood. I especially appreciate that.
Oh, well.
And I think that has a lot to do with why there's a lot of people that still believe that abortion is okay. Because again, it gets rid of unwanted children. Okay? And I would just like to make a suggestion that during the course of your presentation, that maybe you can intersperse some photos of children of color. This one is beautiful, absolutely.
A great point.
But I kind of have to make it to you.
Well, thank you. That's a great point. And these are the comments I love to get. I'm usually very sensitive. I'm from a very mixed family. My sister's Black. My youngest daughter's adopted Chinese. My wife is Cuban. My mother's Jewish. So I'm from a very mixed group. But this is exactly what I need to hear, because I make mistakes all the time. So you can be sure I'm giving another presentation next week. There'll be a switched image for sure. And this is how I get better. Absolutely. I'm grateful. I'm very grateful. Yes, hi. So it's not technically on the ballot, but it's on everybody's mind, this ballot. So right now the question is, pro-choice people, I try not to get into the politics too much of it. The question is going to be how many is the Dobbs decision going to drive pro-choice people to the polls? And I feel strongly, again, I'm wrong all the time, that if the economy was doing well, if there was no war going on with Russia, if there were not crime out of control and issues with immigration, however you feel about the subject, that the Democrats would sweep the election right now, based solely on Dobbs. But because there's so much other chaos going on in the world, polling shows, if you believe polling, that it's maybe the 4th or 5th most important issue on voters' minds right now. So it's really up in the air. And I think one thing we know about polling is we don't know anything about polling. I think that's fair. It's a fair comment. But it's a great question. Yes, ma'am. So there was a moment for me, a big moment when something changed. So I was in medical school. I had already met my wife in medical school, who was a hardcore Cuban Catholic pro-life person who married me. Like, what the heck was she thinking, right? I don't know what she was thinking. Anyway, so I was in the anatomy lab one night, and in the corner there was a little ante-room, like a little room off the side there that nobody used. It stored old desks and old chairs, and nobody went in there. So I'm studying one night, and I walked in there, and there's a cabinet up against the wall, covered in dust. And I walk over to the cabinet, and I look over the side, and on shelves are these jars with formaldehyde and babies in them. And it's not like it was a display case in use. It probably hadn't been looked at in 20 years, just discarded in this room. And I sat there staring at these babies, embryos and fetuses in different stages of development. And the more I looked, the more horrified I became at how irreverently these babies had been discarded. And it really bothered me. So the next day I hunted down our embryology professor, who was a fantastic professor. And I said to her, I said, last night I stumbled across this display, and it's been discarded. And I said to her, I was horrified at how irreverently those babies were displayed. And she grew angry and irritated and mad, and she began pointing at me. She says, those are not babies. Those are not babies. They were never babies. They were never alive. And she stopped, and I looked at her, and she looked at me, and I looked at her, and she looked at me. And you know Hamlet from Shakespeare, the lady doth protest too much? I suddenly knew the truth, and interestingly I knew she knew the truth. We just stared there and looked at each other. And that was a big moment. And then I originally trained as an OBGYN before I became a radiologist. And when a woman miscarries, and you hold in your hand a little baby, an embryo. Remember, we talked about facts, truths, and sciences are on our side. That's why it's so exciting. It's a winning. We're on a winning side. I seem to never be on the winning side. Like if you like the Miami Dolphins, you're not used to being on the winning side. But to be on the winning side is such an exciting thing. Facts, truth, and science is on our side. Holding a little baby in your hand, you know what you're holding. You know you're holding a baby. So it's a profound thing, and it really changes you. So that was the big change. And then becoming Catholic, I became pro-life before I became Catholic, and then I became Catholic, and then I became a wacko. All because I took communion by accident 20 years before that. Yes. Okay. So this is a great question, and it's a very tough issue. I have very strong opinions. I'm a wacky Catholic. I've absolutely clear issue. I know clearly where I stand on the issue of contraception and on sex outside of marriage. I have no doubts where I stand. Now, after Roe, I'm like, I have a little presentation. If you want to hear it later on, if we have time, if we don't get locked up. I tell people, stop talking about contraception if you're pro-life. For now, stop talking about contraception. I want to save babies' lives right now until I can switch things down. As soon as I say, we're against contraception. Oh, you're one of those wacko cats. Look at him. He's a wacko. You see that guy over there? See that guy over there? He's wacko. You want to be with him? He's crazy. That guy's crazy. So I don't want to be manipulated as being the crazy man. So I have very strong opinions. I'm fiercely Catholic, and natural family planning, and I'm how I believe is the right approach for 1,000 reasons. Not just because that's my faith, but because my faith informs everything, and now I know why I feel that way. Absolutely. I believe again in incrementalism, and if you look, you give me any societal problem we have right now, crime, illiteracy, drug use, sexual abuse, it all comes down to one thing always. It's the lack of traditional family and our faith, lack of faith and traditional family, and those things go hand in hand. So the argument I always make with my parents, they're like, well, it's too late. You're never going to get people back to believing in marriage. And I said, you know what? and this is actually my wife's argument, she says, go back 50 years, everybody smoked cigarettes. And society decided that cigarettes are bad. And we did billboards and advertisements, and we went crazy about smoking, and we taxed it, we made it difficult. And now a small percentage of people, compared to what it was 50 years, smoke cigarettes. So that's got to be the next campaign. And I try to do it maybe a step at a time. Maybe I'm not an expert, so maybe I don't know what the right approach is, and I shouldn't think out loud in front of you right now. But maybe it isn't get back to religion. Maybe we get back to traditional ways, traditional mores, traditional values. Maybe that's the way we do it, how we package it. I don't know. And I could change my mind. Any of you could convince me I'm wrong. Maybe we got to start with religion and then get to the family. I'm not sure how we go there.
I think it's just living what Christ asked us to do. Respect each other, take care of each other, share love with each other, so that everybody, not just African Americans, not just Hispanic, but I love all of you. Some of you all have unwed mothers too, but I think that's it. When you can demonstrate, what is that sign? They will know you are Christian by our love. Okay? So once we start doing that, we don't have, I agree with you about, don't make the religious argument up front. Just, hey, I love you, I care about you. And at some point in time, we'll have a conversation about why I care about you.
Right.
Who helps me?
I agree completely. Let our behavior, preach the gospel, use words if necessary. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So you mentioned that your best friend is so completely Christ. Now, my friends and I don't really talk about these issues. I don't think we've ever spoken about abortion. And based on the tidbits of your interviews, I feel like they might be his voice. So how do you recommend bringing this up and approaching it from, try to begin the process of this discussion?
It's going to sound very self-serving, but I would say tomorrow, I saw this guy. Oh, I'm sorry. The question is, so how old are you? I'm going to ask you. You're young enough I can ask you. Okay, so a 20-year-old young woman says she suspects some of her friends might be pro-choice. They usually don't talk about abortion. How does she raise this issue with them in a way that's not off-putting, in a constructive way? And I would say, and I'm an old guy with kids older than you now, I think the way is, you see your friend tomorrow, say, I was at this talk last night. It was really interesting. It surprised me last night. This guy came in and talked about abortion. I hadn't even thought about most of what he said before. I thought it was fascinating. I hear his talks are online. I think you might like them. I bought the book. It's a weird book. I mean, it's an interesting book. I hadn't thought about those arguments. I bought you a copy. I bought 5 copies for 5 friends. And in fact, steal one if you want. You're too young to have a full job now, so go steal one. But that's how you do it. You can't. One of the things I talk about all the time is about having courage. My wife has more courage than all of you combined. She's fearless. Maybe she's reckless. She's so fearless. I have less courage than any of you. But 62 million children need me to speak for them. So before I came in here, you might have seen I was sitting out over there a little bit, and Father came up to me and he says, "Are you okay?" And I say, "Oh, I'm fine." I was trying not to sweat and get too nervous in front of you guys. It's not my forte. I don't usually get up on the microphone and do it. But I don't have the option. I don't have to. I got to get out of my comfort zone. That doesn't mean you have to go in a stadium and speak, but that means tomorrow I'm going to talk to my roommate. I'm going to find the way. The next week I'm going to find the right moment. And not just say, "Are you pro-choice? Do you believe?" Say, I saw the speaker the other day. I never thought about it. It was really interesting. You might like it. It was fascinating. I never thought about this, and I never thought about this and this. And that may be how you get into it. And realize that they might disagree with you, and that's okay. And you're not going to stick it to them. And you can still be friends and have different views. You're playing the long game. You're playing the long game. And remember, I've maybe met one person in this debate that I would say, "God, that's a bad person." And I shouldn't even say that about that one person. They're just wrong. And I'm wrong all the time on so many things that I should be a little more patient about people who are wrong, right? So the long game I'm bringing to my side. I've probably taken way too much of your time up. Anybody else? Any questions at all? Oh, by the way, you can reach me through the website, speakingfortheunborn.org. It'll email directly. So if you have ideas, complaints, maybe have a better idea for me in the book, and give it to me. I'd love it. Thank you all very much.
Know that I preach rather long. Write your name and I homilies go about 18 minutes long. If I could speak at the speed of Dr. Steve, you'd be in church 2 minutes. That was it. Doctor, what a wonderful, wonderful evening. Let's hear it for the doctor. I want to thank Dr. Steve in bringing his expertise, his medical knowledge, his legalese. He is such a well-rounded gentleman, and that we view abortion now in a multifaceted dimension rather than it's a sin and it's wrong. I think Dr. Steve has opened our minds because, let's face it, that's not the dialogue people respond to today. Among us religious, yes, but in the secular world, as the doctor pointed out, religious language turns them completely off. I want to thank the Third Order for sponsoring this evening. And before we have our final presentation, you know me from church. I always let out a challenge. If everyone here tonight could buy one item, whether it's doctor's book or whether it's religious goods, if everyone here could buy just one item, I want you to completely defeat Doctor of his books. I saw him when I drove in, bringing the boxes from his car to here. Let's save him that aggravation and have him walk with his hands free. Doctor, our Third Order, since you gave to us, has a presentation for you. Corali Maldonado, who is our parish secretary and administrator, has this gift for the doctor. On behalf of the Third Order.
I do a lot of speaking at a lot of parishes, and I have to say, it's the enormous reception. We have a wonderful group of people here.
Let's hear it. Again, we invite you to the rear of the hall. Remember, make all these books disappear.
And thanks to my AV person over here, who's done all the hard work.
He is the man behind all of our live streams of Mass.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Have a safe home.